Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Soliday, and I am the Digital Marketing Director at QuestionPro. Today's webinar is titled The Ultimate Guide to Effective Surveys. Now, we here at QuestionPro have been around for over 15 years and have served 2.8 million customers. Our online survey platform gives you all of the online survey software tools to effectively design, distribute, and analyze surveys. However, the problem is getting there and getting the insights that you need is both a delicate art and a science. Great surveys are the foundation of actionable results, but getting there can be extremely difficult. Fortunately, to be effective with surveys, you don't have to be a statistician or seasoned market research professional. In this webinar, we will cover the fundamental survey best practices so that you can act on the best information possible. The webinar will provide you with effective tips so that you can make the most out of designing, distributing, and analyzing your surveys. Our special guest today is Dan Fleetwood, who is the CX president of QuestionPro. Dan has over 15 years of market research experience and is passionate about the role software plays in helping businesses. Dan believes that software can help companies get better feedback, uncover actionable insights, and ultimately develop better products and services. Dan is currently the president of QuestionPro Communities, but prior to that, Dan worked with Survey Analytics and the Pacific Market Research. Today's objectives, we will be setting research objectives, understanding your target audience, designing optimal survey length, and creating the optimal survey questions, developing proper survey branching, and developing survey distribution. As a result of this, from this webinar, we will be better able to analyze surveys and create actionable survey data. This presentation will be 35 to 45 minutes with 15 minutes of QA. So within the GoToWebinar chat page, please provide your questions there and don't forget to hashtag your survey guide. So without further ado, here is Dan Fleetwood.
Great, thanks, James. That was a great introduction about what we're going to be covering today. And I'm definitely excited to be talking about effective online surveys and really giving you guys some good tips and tricks and things that we've learned along the way in conducting these mini surveys that we do. So I think what we'll first dive into, and if you could advance the slides there, we will get into, before you start thinking about your survey and your survey questions, what you really want to start thinking about is setting your research objectives. This is a key component of any research project, especially online surveys. So the old adage here is, you can't start creating a survey without research objectives. It's really akin to starting a road trip without GPS. Sure, you might have fun along the way and you'll get lost and have maybe a fun journey, but at the end you'll just end up lost and without any good actionable data. So this kind of relates back to setting your research objectives, and another key things with research objectives is work with key stakeholders to establish the objectives of the study. It's important to get buy-in and even feedback from these stakeholders and other parties. And the biggest thing here is you're making sure that you're keeping everybody on task, because I'm sure, as many of you know, the more stakeholders and the more people you bring into a particular survey or particular project, the more they'll want to add in what they want to do or different questions or objectives that they want to meet. But it's important that you don't let this get too far out of hand, and you really reel it in and make sure that while getting buy-in from the stakeholders, that you're still setting the objectives of the study. And objectives should be specific and measurable. And this really ties into, vague objectives will lead to sloppy research. There's no other way about it. You want specific and measurable objectives for a clear path. And this really goes into, GPS for your research. And we, gave the example of, a little bit earlier about the road trip, and you don't want to start that without a GPS. So similar, you don't want to start a survey project without good objectives. And what do those specific and measurable objectives look like? Well, it starts with using good action verbs, like to compare, to calculate, to identify. These are good verbs because what they'll lead to is good data and good analysis that you can do on that data on the back end. So you're comparing, you're calculating things, you're identifying them. If you use vague or non-active verbs like to understand, to believe, to notice, these are really sort of abstract terms that it's not really any quantifiable things that you can do. I'm sure you want to understand things better, but you need to be more specific in your objectives, like to compare and to calculate and to identify. So after we have our research objectives set, we can go and start thinking about understanding our audience. And what this really dives into is really keeping these 3 points in mind when you're thinking about your survey and organizing your survey. So these 3 questions are, what decision are you trying to make? What criteria are you using to make your decision? Whose opinion do you need to make that decision? And really, it's coming down to what insights are you hoping to gain, or what action do you want to do that will affect this research, or what are you trying to affect? And this is important, especially when you're getting into the third question there, whose opinion do you need to make that decision? This is key in figuring out your target audience. You don't want to start sampling general consumers when you have a specific survey about a particular tech product that the general consumer will understand. And this would tie it back into the decisions you're trying to make and the criteria that you're using to make that decision. You want to make sure that your audience can then answer these criteria and these set of decisions so that you're asking, getting the right audience in there. This is definitely a crucial step along the way. Next, we'll talk about, developing your survey and remembering these points. So in addition to setting your research objectives and understanding your target audience and asking those 3 questions, really developing your survey is another, key component here along the roadmap. What we're going to be doing, when developing the survey, we keep these 3 things in mind. And this is a little bit different than the 3 previous things that we talked about. Those are more in regard to audience and different decisions that you should, why you're trying to do the research, different decisions that you're keeping in mind. These are really around when you're talking to your audience, keeping these things in mind. So you want to think about fatigue. So respondents becoming mentally exhausted due to length, repetitiveness, or overwhelming complexity in your surveys or questions. All of these things will lead to bad data collection, which then leads to bad data on the back end, and you're not getting the actionable insights that you'll want, to get out of this data, out of this research. And then answerability. So, respondents are unable to provide accurate responses due to insufficient knowledge or recall. You want to make sure that you're giving the respondent all the information they need, or that they have all the information they need to then answer these questions and really feel like they are able to provide an honest answer. You don't want a respondent guessing or happenstancely answering a question if they don't really feel like they can do it, or the question might be too confusing. And this is where clarity really comes into play. If respondents misinterpret or fail to answer questions, or they're misled by poor word choice or question phrasing, this in turn will lead to the bad data that we collecting bad data that we had previously mentioned. So fatigue, answerability, and clarity are really 3 key things to keep in mind when not only developing your survey, but also developing your survey questions. It's really important to keep to keep these in mind and just keep them at the ready. I know even if you're the most seasoned researcher and you've written many surveys, I think it's easy to get lost, and you need to come back to the basics a little bit and remember these things as well. So we have a few survey design tips for you, and this is really when you're designing your survey, and some different things to keep in mind while you're doing this. And you want to make sure that you clearly structure your survey. This includes having an introduction, a good introduction that states the purpose of your research, how much time it's going to take to complete the survey. That's a very important key. In the end, the biggest thing that these respondents are giving you their opinions, but they're also giving you their valuable time, and it's important to state how much time and really be true to that in the introduction as well, and providing more context around what the survey is going to entail and why you're conducting the research. And then, along with that is having good screener questions. You want to make sure that you're getting the right people or the right audience in your survey that are going to be able to answer, your questions effectively. If you have the wrong audience, you're collecting bad data. So it's of the utmost importance that your screener is right on point with your research objectives, and also, the ultimate target audience that you need for your particular study. And then the body. This is, where the fun begins. This is where you're collecting the data, and you're asking the questions that you really need to know in order to make these actionable insights. And then, of course, the demographics. The demographics are key, so that way you can start to make some you can start to segment and really make some actionable insights and subsets of the data, so that you can see if there's particular aspects or different areas that might be more keen to need this particular type of structure, and so forth. So that's really good in sort of in getting the analysis on the back end. And then you want to definitely keep the medium in mind. Don't forget about mobile. So we know that over 50% of the surveys conducted are done on a mobile device. It's important not to lose sight of this when thinking about your survey. You want to keep this in mind, so that way um, you're thinking about overall length, questions asked, number of answer options. So you want to remember this, because if your questions start to get too long, or your survey gets to be the length gets to be too much, you want to keep this in mind, because filling out a survey on mobile that is long, it's gonna seem longer on mobile than it is on a laptop. So you definitely want to remember the form factor as well. So you want to remember that on a mobile phone you have a limited amount of real estate, a limited amount of screen space. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your questions, your answer options short and concise, so that it's easy for the respondent to understand. And this goes back in to the clarity and answerability of the questions. You want to know your audience and what they can handle. So when you're thinking about designing your survey, you want to think about, is it for the general consumer, or is it a more specialized respondent? This way you can get a little bit more in depth about, if it's a general consumer, that your survey questions need to be simple. They need to be, at a reading level that is well below what you think. I mean, I've heard some statistics out there that, when you're writing your survey questions, you want to write it at a third or fourth grade level, really basic, simple. You want to remember that this is the general consumer, so you're going to be dealing with all types of folks. Whereas you have a more specialized respondent, someone that knows your area, knows the technical terms and so forth, then it's probably okay to use a little bit more advanced wording and so forth. But you just want to be really cognizant of that, and be aware when you're designing your survey. And then keep, kind of going back to this, but be clear and concise, and keep your research goals in mind. Don't lose sight of that as you're starting to design your survey, and you're designing your questions in regard to those research objectives. So we touched on this a little bit, but we want to talk about more of the optimal length of your surveys. And a key study a couple of years ago, so that respondents check out after 15 to 20 minutes. So we found that the optimal length is between 10 to 12 minutes. So keeping survey length down is it's important to ensure that you're getting the best results possible. You want to make sure that respondents are engaged and aren't checking out after that 15 to 20-minute time. You want them to be thinking critically about your questions. And if they're checking out after 20 minutes and you have a 30, 40-minute long survey, that's not good for you, obviously, as you're going to be collecting bad data that, again, is going to lead to insights that aren't necessarily true or accurate, and the respondent's going to be fatigued, and they're not going to have quite the clarity that they would normally on a 10 to 12-minute survey, where they're going to be more more attuned to stay engaged with the survey. And again, with mobile, you want to think about this, and we touched on this a little bit on the previous slide, but I want to bring it up again because it's so important. 15 to 20 minutes feels like a really long time on mobile, where it might not feel as long on a laptop. So you want to keep you want to keep this in mind, especially when you're dealing with your particular audience. Is it the general consumer? Is a more specialized respondent that you know is going to be taking the survey more on a laptop, or is it going to be is it a quick 10-question survey where you want to keep it on mobile and you want to keep it light and not have a lot of really complex questions. So you want to remember this and make sure that you're thinking about length. And I know, and I'm sure that many of you can attest, and if you haven't run into this yet, I'm sure that you will, is whenever if you're doing a study in a big organization or you're doing a study for a big company, there'll be many people that want to put their questions in, and as soon as you go all the way around the room and everyone has their questions, it's going to start to become a really bloated survey, and you're going to have to start trying to axe out certain questions, and this could be really hard to do, especially when all those stakeholders want their questions in there. And this is where you as the person designing or the team designing the survey needs to be really clear and make some concessions there, but be super clear on length, and that you want it to make this the best experience for the respondent so that you're getting the best data. And this is where the optimal length of 10 to 12 minutes. I'll tell you on average, surveys just distributed on a QuestionPro are about 35 minutes. So, or sorry, not 35 minutes, 35 questions rather. And, this can be in the 10 to 12 minute range depending on the complexity of the questions as well. And if you really can't reduce the length of your survey, you want to make sure that if on longer surveys that you're including a save and continue option, and this will help with respondent fatigue, so they can take the survey and then they can come back into it at a later time when maybe if they run into something. I mean, if you're asking people to take 30-minute survey, they're giving you a lot of their time, so it's definitely a good practice to include a save and continue option to help with that respondent fatigue and respondents checking out. So we'll get into some survey question tips now. So overall, your survey questions should help answer the research objectives. This first statement might seem like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised, I think, how many lose sight of this key fact. Overall, it's important to definitely to keep this in mind. Your survey questions, it's of the utmost paramount experience that they're helping to answer the research objectives, and that all of your questions have a direct correlation to those research objectives. Ask specific, relevant questions. This goes back to having clear and measurable objectives, and also helping with the clarity and answerability of your survey. And you want to avoid confusing technical or unfamiliar terms. You want to keep respondents on track. Keep loaded questions or phrases off the table. And the next principle, is a little bit tongue in cheek with the KISS here. Keep it simple, stupid. But it's an important principle to remember, even though it might be a little, kind of play on words or tongue in cheek. If you don't keep it simple, or you find the survey questions or answers confusing, think about how that's going to be for your audience. It's going to be really hard for them to understand if you, as the person who's owning the survey and understands these different techniques and what you're trying to get at, or terminology, if you don't understand it or you find it confusing, it's definitely going to be it's definitely going to be confusing for the respondent. And then use scales when possible. Scales are good in survey questions because you can easily aggregate the data on the back end and make some key analysis on it after you've collected it. So now we'll get into some examples of poorly written surveys, and James is going to cover a few slides over here.
I will do that. I'm sorry, I'm having a couple of issues, but I think we're good right now. So just wanted to take you through 4 examples of poorly written questions. I'm citing examples from the NBA, so hopefully this is right. that they're wearing, how do they improve that, or the arena they play in. But if your intended goal is around, how do you improve the performance or play of the Lakers? A better question would be, how do the Lakers improve their on-court performance, or what can the Lakers do to have a better record? Those would be much better questions to ask the audience because it's clear and you're trying to get to a specific objective. The second question is, who is currently the best player in the NBA? A, Stephen Curry, B, LeBron James, or C, Kevin Durant? Now, these are all very valid questions, and the likelihood is a lot of people will pick one of those three, but someone else may think that Russell Westbrook might be the best player in the NBA, for example. So there is no representation for that. So there needs to be another choice, such as other or none of the players above. That would better structure your survey question. And then, for example, the next question 3, how many NBA championships will the Golden State Warriors win with Kevin Durant? A, 0-2, B, 2-4, C, 4-6, or D, 6+. The problem with this survey is that they're now mutually exclusive. Or the question is that they're now mutually exclusive. For example, if you think the Warriors will win 2 championships, now your answer will be either A or B. So this is not creating a very accurate result with this. And the fourth question, the last question is 5-time NBA MVP Michael Jordan the greatest basketball player of all time? Now, the reality is many people probably think that is true. However, this question creates a lot of bias. And the fact that the question has 5-time NBA MVP can actually skew that audience. And I've read in a report that it could skew the audience anywhere between 20 and 30%. So these are just 4 examples of kind of the gotchas where that could negatively impact your surveys, and as a result, not get necessarily the optimal answer you're looking for. So I will actually throw this back to Dan for interesting survey question types to include. And this is part of the QuestionPro platform.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. I think those were good examples of poorly written questions. It's funny to have a good example of a poorly written question. It seems like a little bit of an oxymoron, but nonetheless, I think those were good. And we want to jump into, as you're creating your survey and you're designing it, think about some of these different interesting question types to include. And the first one of these is Net Promoter Score. If you're doing any sort of customer satisfaction research, NPS is of the utmost importance. It's one of the industry standards for determining customer satisfaction and loyalty. You'll be able to see who are the detractors, the passives, promoters, and then this rolls into an overall NPS score as well that you can use across industry standards to see where your company ranks or company you're doing research for ranks amongst other similar companies. So this is of the utmost importance. That's why you see it after anytime you do anything now these days. If you take a flight, right after your flight's over, you're going to be getting an email that says, "Hey, please rate your experience. Would you recommend this to a friend or colleague?" And then this gets rolled back into an overall NPS dashboard that each company has. So you'll see this a lot, and it's an important thing to include in your research, especially if you're doing customer satisfaction type research. Another interesting question type to include, a couple here, is one is MaxDiff. If you haven't used MaxDiff before, it's a great way of evaluating the importance of a number of alternatives. So in this particular question, we have choose your most and least preferred option, and this is a series of different attributes, and these attributes are credit cards: Visa, Master, Discover, and American Express. So you're going to be asking the respondent to choose their most and then their least preferred choice. And questions, MaxDiff question type has proven to generate better data quality than rating scales in virtually every evaluative measure. And the reason is you get a lot more distinction between which is the most important, which is the least important. If you're using rating scales, you're going to find that if you're asking them, you'll get a lot of there won't be a lot of variance. There'll be, Visa will be a 3, Mastercard will be a 3, Discover might be, a 3.5, and then American Express will be a 4. On a 1 to 5 rating scale. Well, it's hard to make a lot of good actionable, data or actionable business decisions there. But with MaxDiff, you're going to be getting a different share of preference, so you can see actual, good scores between your most and your least preferred attribute. Another good example is conjoint. So a conjoint discrete choice analysis is used when brands want to know more about the how important different elements of a decision are. So those elements are different factors or different features that make up a product. So and you'll what it will tell you is you'll know which attributes are the most important and the best the best overall makeup of the product. So you'll know what MaxDiff will tell you is it'll present the respondent with a set of alternatives. So you can set it to be 1 or 2 options or more, or excuse me, what discrete choice will be. And these will be different makeups of a particular product or a particular service offering. And in the end, it'll tell you um, which attributes are the most important and what is the best set of those attributes that'll make up an overall product. So definitely important to use if you're doing any sort of product research. And both of these question types you can set up in minutes on the QuestionPro platform. So those are some interesting question types. Next, once you have your survey constructed and you have your survey questions in there, you want to start thinking about survey branching. So branching or skip logic gives you the ability to create intelligent surveys by creating a custom path. So you can choose based on answers to relevant questions what path respondents are going to take through the survey. So if you're doing a survey about foosball and you see that you want to only find foosball players for a particular section of the survey, you can set up branching or simple skip logic so that you can choose that people aren't playing foosball. They can be taken to the next set in the next set in the survey where maybe you're asking about ping pong or some other fun office sport that people like to play. And that's the most simple example, but you can definitely see where this would come in handy because you don't want to be asking non-foosball players questions about foosball. Likewise, you can use that's the most simple skip logic. You can also use more complex logic where you can base skip logic off of previous questions in the survey. So maybe early on you asked a question, and then later you want to use that question in conjunction with another question later in the survey to then skip. So it's not so much a sequential skip logic. You can do that pretty easily. And then you can do show hide logic for questions and also answer options as well. So those are definitely good things to keep in mind when you're thinking about the overall structure of your survey, and definitely keep branching in mind. And you want to make sure that you have all these options available to you when creating your survey. So next we'll get into a few things like mistakes and gotchas to avoid when you're still setting up your survey. So you want to avoid questions that are confusing or misleading, questions that are too long, questions that do not identify specific issues or problems, maybe questions that use ambiguous rating systems, surveys that do not provide the customer with the ability to clarify answers, or freely written responses can be difficult to quantify through analysis. So I think we've touched a little bit on all of these, but and you'll see some common things here. Common themes here is clarity, making sure that the respondents aren't fatigued if your questions are too long or they're confusing. Your respondents are going to have a lot of cognitive load when trying to complete the survey, and you want to make it the best experience that you can for them. So that's why these things are really important. And we'll wrap up. We'll go to some of the best practices here, and then we'll get into more different ways you can send out your survey and also analyzing your survey as well. So some of the best practices, and this is a recap of survey design and also creating questions and make sure that you have the best question types in there. You want to have a clear introduction that states the purpose of your survey. We talked about this. You want to make sure that you're giving your respondents or people that are taking the survey a clear roadmap of what they can expect. You want to ask your screening questions next up after the introduction to make sure they qualify. You want to ask the most important questions first, and this is kind of a key that you want to keep in mind, especially if you have a survey where people might be falling off at the end, and you want to make sure that you have the answers to these key specific questions. You can ask those most important questions first. You want to mix in simple and complex questions. This will help out with keeping the respondent engaged and also not bringing too much complexity to them all at once. If you're asking a lot of matrix scale type questions, and you need to be able to mix that up with a couple simple questions just to help the respondent regroup and get back their train of thought and help out with that fatigue. Then you want to ask demographic questions last. You don't necessarily have to, but typically by the end of the survey, the respondent's a little bit more comfortable in the research and they're more likely to answer some of these perhaps more or perceived more sensitive demographic questions. And then finally, it's important to have a good thank you page. Respondents are giving you their opinions, but they're also giving you their time. So be sure to thank them for their time. That's a key component that will help you out and will help make good survey respondents overall. So now that you've designed your survey, you have your questions all set, you have your branching logic. The next step is to distribute the survey. So you can do this in a variety of different ways, and you can do it via an open link. So just a survey link that you might post somewhere in an office or a kiosk or whatever that method is. You can distribute it via an open link. If you have an email list, you can send out an email invitation to folks on that list. And a good thing to do with the email invitation, if you're making use of that, is to include a QuestionPro has an option where you can embed that first question in the survey in the email, and that's an important step because we've seen an increase in response rates of 300% by just embedding that first question in the actual email invitation. So if you do have an email list and you're making use of that, it's a key element for your response rates to embed that first question in that email. And then the third party panel. So if you don't have respondents at the ready to answer your survey, you need to go out and you need to buy some third party sample. You can definitely do that. Maybe it's an intercept study on a website where someone goes to the website, they get intercepted with a pop-up saying, hey, please complete the survey now, or they click on a different tab, or that before they leave the survey. That could be another method to distribute it. You can distribute it via social media and also the communities platform, which is really a makeup of your consumers that you can survey over time, and you can reward them. You can also get more qualitative insights via some topics, ideation, and discussion modules as well. But that's definitely a great way to go about it, especially if you're going to be, want to be doing research with an ongoing customer base over time. So those are really the kind of 6 key ways that you can distribute your survey. And I would just make sure that it's matching up to your target audience. How are you reaching that target audience? What's the best way to reach them? And align that with the best method to distribute your survey. So after you have your survey designed, you have your survey questions, you've distributed your survey, results are coming in. Now it's time to analyze your survey, and we'll get into some of these these 4 key points here, and then we'll also we'll show you a few different ways that you can analyze it via some charts and graphs. But don't overlook simple analysis using these frequency and chart graphs. They're at the core, and will give insights on how the respondents are answering the questions. They're good to share with other stakeholders. You can have a dashboard report that lists out all the key makeup, with whether that's completes, the starteds, the terminates, along with how folks are answering the question. And you can share this via a link. It's a good way, again, to disseminate that information and to start to make some relevant or actionable insights around the data. You can get into a little bit more sophisticated segmentation, where you can break down the data into specific groups. So if you want to analyze males 18 to 34 and females 18 to 34 separately, you can do that. And you can start to look for different trends amongst that subset of your sample so that you can really start to slice and dice the data there. Crosstabs have been around for a long time, and I would say that they're still very relevant. It's an effective way to analyze the data and really get some of those advanced statistics around your data that you wouldn't normally be able to get otherwise. So it's good because you can cross the data by other questions or other variables across all of your survey questions, and you can really start to see some key trends there as well. And then if you're using open-ended questions in your survey, um, a good way to analyze these is a good text analysis or text analytics tool. Once you have with these tools, and QuestionPro does offer a good text analysis tool, you can categorize your open-ended responses, and then once you've categorized all the responses under those appropriate categories, it'll auto tag those open-ended responses, and you can start to view pie charts and reports for some of those open-ended tools. So it's a good method to go about um, analyzing and making use of some of that, those open-ended responses. So now let's get into some different charts and other things that you can use to analyze your data. This is a pretty simple infograph, but it gives you a lot of key insights, especially if you want to see how your survey is progressing during field, and um, also if you want to relate back to some of the methodology and getting some of those numbers as well. You can see how many viewed, how many completed, how many dropped out, how many started the survey, your completion rate, which is pretty important in terms of figuring out bias and overall error, and then also the average number of time it took to take the survey. So a quick, clean, dashboard view like this of an infographic is a good way to get a high level overview of how your survey is performing. Next, we touched on this, and it's a good way, a simple frequency dashboard, and this is key because it really presents the information in an easily digestible format. Here, will you be watching March Madness games this year? It's either no or yes, and you can easily see, based on the pie chart, that more people answered yes than no, and you can start to make, some certain assumptions as well, just based on this simple graph. You can see, the different percentages there, along with overall count. So it's a good way, again, along with coupled with a dashboard report, to start to make sense of some of the data. And then you can also get into some of the more advanced analysis. And we talked about max diff a little bit, and we gave the example of Visa, Mastercard, American Express, and Discover. So really, with this max diff analysis, you can start to see the share of preference. So you can see that Visa has the highest share of preference over a Discover, which has the lowest share of preference. So this is the kind of analysis that max diff will give you, a clear distinction that that attribute of Visa has a much higher share of preference than the lowest, which would be Discover here. So really clear, concise, overall max diff reporting here. And then another more advanced, and we touched on this question type earlier, was a conjoint discrete choice. Here you can see your different attributes along with the levels. So this is in regard to a TV. You can see you have the attributes of size, price, and brand, and then you can see the relative importance that your sample has placed on each of those different attributes. So you can see here that when it comes to purchasing a TV, that size in this particular sample set was the most important. And then you can also start to look at some of the utility values in each one of those levels and make some good actionable insights there. With at the it looks like the 45-inch level had the highest utility value, along with if you look at price, the $800 range had the highest utility value, along with the brand being LG. So you can start to see the different levels and the different attributes that would make up a product, and what the best set of those attributes would be. So that's really the power behind discrete choice conjoint. So, once you have your analysis, and you've done your survey, you have all the results are in, now you can really start to make some informed decisions based on your survey. Through analysis comes actionable business decisions, and this goes back into your research objectives, goes back into the three main questions on why you're doing the research, what decisions are you trying to make, and through all these good survey tips that we've given you today, and if you take these and make them actionable in your surveys, you'll see that there'll be good actionable business decisions that come out of this. And a good way to start to disseminate or tease out some of these decisions are you want to, when you're using the result, use the results of the analysis charts and graphs to tell a compelling story around your data. It's a good thing to have the data and do analysis on it, but you want to be able to tell that compelling story in order to feed back up into those actionable business decisions. And then, a key phrase here is without good data and good analysis, we just have opinions. We need actionable data to make well-informed decisions, and I think that sums it up nicely here. So, I know